Chapter 12. Scene 1. Classes. Bethany and Naomi were able to arrange to be in the same classes. Naomi was elated, as was Bethany, but after 2 weeks, Bethany tired of the training to be a future housewife. She wanted much more, especially from the history class, which focused largely on women's subservient role to their husbands. That role was generously supported by a wealth of quotes from the Bible and the repeated recitation of the benefits to the church and the family. As Bethany listened week after week, she felt more uncomfortable and more resistant. There appeared to be holes in the reasoning. Parts of the Bible, especially about the compassion of Christ's teachings, did not match with other parts, especially the Old Testament, and, indeed, the actions and practices of the evangelical Christian religion. Most disturbing was a gigantic gap in history between the old United States of America and the new United Christian States of America. It was hard for her to believe that the old United States of America was as evil as the current history purported. When it was very rarely discussed, it was spoken of in degrading terms. She found herself resisting the unflattering commentary as it assaulting her view of humankind. Her belief that people were, by nature, basically, ultimately good because they were made in God's image had become the major block to accepting the current rendition of history. That many people could not be that bad. After Friday chapel, she and Naomi were walking to the limousine when an image of Jenkins Woods and a hatch made of roots wormed its way into her mind. It was time to return to see if any answers were hidden underground. Bethany, did you hear anything I said? What? I was talking to you. I'm sorry. I was kind of zoned out. That's been happening a lot lately, especially after history class. So what's going on? Just thinking about all the trials and tribulations the evangelical movement has gone through. It's very interesting. Well, I don't think it's that different from what we have already learned. True, but I see it differently now that I'm older. Really? Yeah. Well, I don't. Maybe you were more mature. We both know that's been true for a long time, little sister. Funny. Downright hilarious. Bethany attended to Naomi's conversation until they went to bed. Scene 2. Bethany searches. As usual, Naomi slept late Saturday. Bethany rose very early, even before her mother and father left for their meetings. She put on a light coat and her gloves. Rita stuck her head out of the kitchen. So, you're starting back on your hiking again? Yes. I missed it, being out in nature. It's so beautiful and relaxing. I think hiking suits you. I suppose you have everything you need. I could use a few rolls. Coming right up. Bethany stuffed them in her backpack. Thanks. Bethany's usual bless you never came. Can we expect you back for lunch? It depends, but I should be back by 1 or 2. 3 at the latest. Why so long? I'm trying to learn the names of the plants. Bethany, you never cease to surprise me. I would never have thought that of you. Be careful. I always am. Out the back door, across the backyard, and through the back gate, Bethany went. She checked the rutted dirt road that ran behind the houses. It was clear both ways. She turned left and headed to the trail. She followed the trail, weaving in and out of the trees and dense undergrowth. As she hiked, she checked for a familiar area. The demarcation of the area wasn't as stark as she remembered. Damn, this is the place. It has to be. These are the trees. She turned in a circle. This is it. I know it is. Starting where she was standing, she walked in a spiral path with her eyes focused on the ground. Her head jerked back briefly. Her shoulders lurched forward, and as if she had been sawed from a stump, she fell. Her backpack flew forward, forcing her neck to bend and jamming her face deeper into the ground than the initial fall the day she discovered the hatch. The forest salad tasted the same grit, and the same slimy feel on her lips. She spit and brushed the debris from her face and lips. She rose, looked where her foot had caught. There, sticking out of the ground, was the 2x4. She pushed the branches and crawling vines aside, uncovering the hatch made of roots. Excitement shivered her body. Whatever was below had to be wondrous. Locking hardware stared up at her. Disappointing, but expected. She examined it closely. She wedged her hands under the edge, on each side of the lock. She pulled gently. It moved. She pulled again. A creaking, squeaking sound stopped her. The slats for the hatch were separating from the frame. She would need to lift the hatch by the frame. She ran her hands around under the hatch until she located the frame. She positioned herself and pulled. It moved several inches. She pulled harder. It opened enough to shine the flashlight in. The hatch was fastened to the concrete. Roots had meandered under the hatch and across the entrance. She would need the gardener's mini, cordless, circular saw. She peered through the roots. For concrete walls formed an entrance and a short tunnel. Concrete entrance? 5 concrete stairs. This is it. The 5 stairs were 4 feet wide and ended at a rusting metal door. Small sections of the concrete entryway had shattered, revealing metal panels under the concrete. She was delirious. Just on the other side of the door was something worth hiding and locking up. It might just be a storage cellar or empty. If this really was part of the town Jenkins Corners, maybe there was something important, something revealing behind the door. After all, a whole city had been built here more than 100, maybe even 200 years ago. Her imagination exploded. Were there other entrances to other underground areas? The prospect was exhilarating. Nothing in her life had totally captured her like this. Now it would never let go. She carefully covered the hatch with the forest debris and erased her presence. All the way home, she was bursting with news of her discovery. She wanted to tell everyone, especially Naomi, but she was certain her discovery might be destroyed. Besides, this was her discovery and hers alone, whatever it was. She had to know it before anyone else. No one else can know, Bethany said as the gate to the backyard latched. Scene 2. Bethany searches. As usual, Naomi slept late Saturday. Bethany rose very early, even before her mother and father left for their meetings. She put on a light coat and her gloves. Rita stuck her head out of the kitchen. So, you're starting back on your hiking again? Yes, I missed it, being out in nature. It's so beautiful and relaxing. I think hiking suits you. I suppose you have everything you need. I could use a few rolls. Coming right up. Bethany stuffed them in her backpack. Thanks. Bethany's usual bless you never came. Can we expect you back for lunch? It depends, but I should be back by 1 or 2. 3 at the latest. Why so long? I'm trying to learn the names of the plants. Bethany, you never cease to surprise me. I would never have thought that of you. Be careful. I always am. Out the back door, across the backyard, and through the back gate Bethany went. She checked the rutted dirt road that ran behind the houses. It was clear both ways. She turned left and headed to the trail. She followed the trail, weaving in and out of the trees and dense undergrowth. As she hiked, she checked for a familiar area. The demarcation of the area wasn't as stark as she remembered. Damn, this is the place. It has to be. These are the trees. She turned in a circle. This is it. I know it is. Starting where she was standing, she walked in a spiral path with her eyes focused on the ground. Her head jerked back briefly. Her shoulders lurched forward, and as if she had been sawed from a stump, she fell. Her backpack flew forward, forcing her neck to bend and jamming her face deeper into the ground than the initial fall the day she discovered the hatch. The forest salad tasted the same grit, and the same slimy feel on her lips. She spit and brushed the debris from her face and lips. She rose, looked where her foot had caught. There, sticking out of the ground, was the 2x4. She pushed the branches and crawling vines aside, uncovering the hatch made of roots. Excitement shivered her body. Whatever was below had to be wondrous. Locking hardware stared up at her. Disappointing, but expected. She examined it closely. She wedged her hands under the edge, on each side of the lock. She pulled gently. It moved. She pulled again. A creaking, squeaking sound stopped her. The slats for the hatch were separating from the frame. She would need to lift the hatch by the frame. She ran her hands around under the hatch until she located the frame. She positioned herself and pulled. It moved several inches. She pulled harder. It opened enough to shine the flashlight in. The hatch was fastened to the concrete. Roots had meandered under the hatch and across the entrance. She would need the gardener's mini, cordless, circular saw. She peered through the roots. For concrete walls formed an entrance and a short tunnel. Concrete entrance? 5 concrete stairs? This is it. The 5 stairs were 4 feet wide and ended at a rusting metal door. Small sections of the concrete entryway had shattered, revealing metal panels under the concrete. She was delirious. Just on the other side of the door was something worth hiding and locking up. It might just be a storage cellar or empty. If this really was part of the town Jenkins Corners, maybe there was something important, something revealing behind the door. After all, a whole city had been built here more than 100, maybe even 200 years ago. Her imagination exploded. Were there other entrances to other underground areas? The prospect was exhilarating. Nothing in her life had totally captured her like this. Now it would never let go. She carefully covered the hatch with the forest debris and erased her presence. All the way home, she was bursting with news of her discovery. She wanted to tell everyone, especially Naomi, but she was certain her discovery might be destroyed. Besides, this was her discovery and hers alone, whatever it was. She had to know it before anyone else. No one else can know, Bethany said as the gate to the backyard latched. Scene 3. Wet feet. The next Friday night, while the family and Rita slept soundly, Bethany crept to the workshop attached to the back of the garage, carrying her backpack. She retrieved the mini cordless circular saw, which hung prominently on a board above the workbench. She placed its bag. Additional saw blades were in the bag. She put the bag at the bottom of her backpack. It produced a noticeable sag. Would Rita notice? If she did, would she say anything? I could set it by the back door. She thought for a moment. I'll set the saw by the back gate now. Maybe outside it. Maybe at the edge of the woods, under something. She looked across the yard at the gate. The dew on the grass sparkled. While beautiful, it meant wet slippers. That would be hard to explain. She took them off and set them on the porch. She rolled up her pajama legs and stepped off the porch. By the time she set the saw outside the gate under a small bush, her feet were wet and cold. A light in Rita's room went on then quickly off. She hurried across the lawn. She stepped into the back porch. Was it a sliver of light in the corner of her eye? She hurriedly wiped as much of the water as she could from her feet and then wiped them on the mat. She slipped into her slippers and quietly walked into the house. With her first step onto the stairs, she heard the door to Rita's downstairs room open. Bethany set her backpack on the far side of the stairs where Rita couldn't see it. "What are you doing up wandering around?" "I was hungry. Since I'm already up, do you want me to fix you something?" "No." I grabbed a roll and some water. "I'm fine. I'm sorry I woke you." "You didn't. I hadn't gone to sleep." "Well, good night." "Good night." Walking up the stairs, she reasoned, Rita didn't see me. Otherwise, she would have said something. Yeah, she would have. For sure. She dried her feet and wiped the inside of her slippers and stuffed 2 washcloths into them. She set the slippers next to the bed. An image of Rita looking out her window kept Bethany awake. Had she seen her? She bolted upright. The glass. There should be glass in the sink or on the counter. I could tell her I rinsed it out in... No, I put it in the dishwasher. What if it was empty? It was an hour before she worried herself to a tenuous sleep. Scene 4. Archives. When Bethany rose Saturday morning after a nearly sleepless night, excitement had driven her weariness and worry away. As Rita walked out of her room, Bethany walked out the back door. Rita's voice sped across the backyard. "Have a nice hike." Bethany's feet stuttered. She turned and waved. After she heard the gate firmly latch, she pulled the saw from under the bush, pushed the contents of the backpack to the side, and put the saw in. With prospects of uncovering the mystery powering her, her strides were longer and faster than normal. She arrived at the hatch quickly, her heart thumping eagerly. She removed the saw from the backpack and then from its bag. She squeezed the trigger to ensure it was working. It sung a high-pitched note. She smiled. She pushed the vegetation aside. She lifted the hatch and, shining the light, she saw several steps leading down. How deep they went, she couldn't tell. It might be a storm cellar. She located the closest root. She cautiously placed the saw on the first root close to the wall. She turned away as a spray of root peppered her face. Brushing her face, she checked her eyes. She was okay. She didn't have to retreat, go home, wash out her eyes. Was this a positive sign? Was this meant to be? Fate? No, ridiculous. But she kept the thought anyway. For all the remaining roots, she turned her head to the side, just as she cut. She hoped the forest muffled the sound. Done. She lifted the hatch. She put her backpack on, picked up the saw, and, closing the hatch behind her, she descended the stairs to the metal door. As she expected, it was locked. She set the backpack down, examined the lock, looking for a good spot. There was no obvious place to put the edge of the blade, so she placed it close to the lock. Turning her head aside again, she pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. Did the woods muffle the roar, or had it alerted hikers, thus ending her quest? She let go of the trigger and looked at the door. There was only a shallow groove. It would take hours, and the noise would attract attention. Maybe a new blade would be better. She opened the side pocket on the bag. There were 5 blades, each with different sized teeth. Names on the blades indicated the use. The blade with the medium-length teeth worked well on the roots. She's smaller teeth blade said metal. How do I change it? She hunted the bag and found only one tool. It had to be the one. She loosened the bolt, removed the blade, put the other blade in, and tightened the bolt. She again placed the saw next to the lock, turned her head, and pulled the trigger. The noise was a higher pitch and less than a fourth of what it had been. She lifted the saw. The grove was much deeper. She cut to the sides, above and below the lock. The door wiggled, but held fast. Okay, be not that way. She examined the door. The frame. For 10 minutes, the saw cut into the frame. The entire locking mechanism was exposed. She pulled on everything in the mechanism that would move. Finally, she heard a metal on metal click. She pushed on the door. It creaked and screamed as it opened. With her flashlight sending a large round light ahead, she continued down the stairs. In front of her was a large room with rows of shelves. A sign hung from the ceiling. She shined the light on it. Archive. Archive. Damn! Was this an archive for Jenkins Corners? She was excited and frightened. If she went further, she could discover what their society was like when there was a United States of America. She might find out about its demise. But if it implicated the church in its disintegration, she would be thrust into a dilemma. How would she feel about the church, which had been the center of her life? She was already skeptical. She had always looked to see the good in people. Would hold. To her core, she wanted and needed to see it. She was sure it could always be found, somewhere. But her religion's view of original sin and the iniquitous nature of people at birth was at war with a world she wished to live in. So, would she inevitably be in a battle with her long-held beliefs? Still, she had to move forward. She looked to the left. On the wall was a plaque reading, "In these times of strife, it is important to preserve the history of our ancestors, good and honest people." This room houses the history of Jenkins Corners. Framed and unframed photographs filled the wall. She walked along the wall thinking, this is what Jenkins Corners looked like. Dates and description were at the bottom of the photos. The photos were arranged by date. They were in rows and columns, starting at 3 feet from the floor to 2 feet down from the ceiling. The first photo was of 5 people standing in front of a small grocery store. The date was May 1941. Walking along the wall, she watched the town grow with new businesses and new people. A large photo from 1975 showed a man and woman standing in front of a building with a sign next to them that read the Jenkins Corners Chronicles. She stopped and leaned toward the photo. The man and woman looked different. There was something she had never seen in the town or church, but had been told about. Their skin was dark. Curious, she went back to the beginning of the photos, carefully looking at each. Not until 1961 was there a dark-skinned person. It was a man standing in front of a garage. Scattered amongst pictures of gatherings of people were a few people with dark skins. A picture of students in front of low-lying wood and stucco structure, Jenkins Corners Elementary School, showed 4 black children. The date was 1968. Jenkins Corners had been a very different place. She wondered why it had changed from then to now. Periodic shots from the center of the main street showed the progression of the town. Side streets appeared. Homes sprung up. The main section of the town reached about a mile. It was a small town, the kind that sprinkled the Midwest. It wasn't especially well organized. The planning appeared to be haphazard, with a few houses turned into city offices. One house at the beginning of the town had been turned into a library. No matter what the year of the photo, all the buildings were well maintained. What a darling little town Jenkins Corners had been. She ventured into the stacks of shelves. As she walked up and down the rows, she saw entire sections devoted to different categories. The sections were organized into years. The first category was Jenkins Corners. Then there was the Ohio State category, then the United States category, then the international category. She hurried back to the Jenkins Corners category. Stacked on the shelves were newspapers in plastic sleeves. Dates were on the edge of the shelf. Included on the shelves were very large books, 12 by 19. They were in stacks of 5 years. The dates on the side were blurred by the yellowing, cracking plastic. She checked the dates. The oldest, 1975, was at the bottom of the 5. She carefully slipped it out. She knelt down and set it on the floor. She removed it from the plastic sleeve, sat cross-legged, set the book on her lap, and opened it. It was the Jenkins Corners Chronicles. It seemed to be a weekly newspaper with periodic special editions. The number of pages appeared to vary with the amount of news. There were few pictures on each page except for the last. She skimmed through several months. The news was basically what was going on in the area, the wider news about the state of Ohio, very little national news, and paltry international news. She returned it to the sleeve and the shelf. She went to another category, Jenkins Corners Records. Except for a few, they were much thicker and in stacks of 3. They started at 1944. She thumbed through it quickly. Property, birth, death, utilities, voting, city finances. How big was Jenkins Corners? She searched through the birth records. As near as she could figure, the town had never exceeded 2,000. She checked the time. I've got 30 minutes left. She returned the book and walked up and down the aisles, running her hand across the dusty binders. As she turned to go down the next aisle, there was a small sign high on the wall above a 4-shelf bookcase. Banned, she muttered. Why? She read the titles. Some seemed to be novels and several art books. The Art of Religion? What's wrong with religious art? She pulled the book out. Shuffling through the pages, she wondered what was so bad it needed to be banned. Oh my! Her finger was on a statue of a naked man. Startled, she closed the book. She returned it to the shelf. Her finger lingered on the top of the binder. She pulled it back out. No one will know. She sat on the floor, went back to the page, and read the caption. Michelangelo's David. Page by page, she scanned the paintings and the statues. Some were nudes. All were beautiful. One was a very cluttered picture of the ceiling of a church, the Sistine Chapel. The panels were too small to see the individual painting. When she turned to the next page, a single panel was pictured. Then there was another and another. Many had nudes. The paintings were beautiful. At the turn of the next page, she was stopped by a mass of figures, some ghoulish, some gray, misshapen forms, some with fearful eyes, some reaching down a hand to pull another up. Most figures at the top were composed of lighter and brighter colors. Most of those at the bottom had darker, duller colors. Amongst them were devils, straining to pull people down. Most of the figures seemed to be scrambling upward, others falling. It felt like a warning. She found the name, The Last Judgment. It was described as a fresco painted behind the altar in the Sistine Chapel. Bethany had a profound reaction to it. It was as if she were caught in the turmoil, not knowing if she was rising to heaven or falling to hell. She could see herself in so many of the images. All were naked to some degree, whether rising or falling. Almost all were pleading wild-eyed to a central figure of Christ placidly looking at pleading vulnerable people. The expressions ranged from defeated to troubled to hopeful. She felt them perched on the edge of salvation and oblivion. The overwhelming power of the fresco enveloped her. She scanned the picture over and over. There were so many people who were so desperate, she had to leave the page. None of the paintings, pictures, or statues were, as the evangelical Christian church claimed, disgusting. They were a depiction of life with all the challenges and emotions that life brings. Then she read. She learned about Manichaeism, a struggle among Christians to view the body and sex as naturally good. Manichaeism saw the human as composed of spiritual nature and physical matter. The spiritual nature was good, the physical matter and sex were sinful. The article argued that was not true. The author said Christianity holds the dignity and sacredness of the human form. People are created in God's image, so how could the body be evil? It was the image God had chosen. God would not have taken on an image that was inherently evil. It was a logic Bethany had never heard nor knew others thought. Engrossed in the art, she suddenly was aware she did not know how much time had passed. She checked her watch. Oh no! She rose, returned the book to the shelf, rushed through the aisles, up the steps, and out the door. She closed the door behind her, stuck her finger in the locking mechanism, and pushed on several parts until she heard the click of the latch. She pulled on the door. It rattled but remained closed. She gazed at the door. Should I tell what I found? She thought for a moment. She wanted to share, to discuss it. She had no answer. I'll make a decision later, not now. Postponed. Her stress softened. She quickly trekked home with the titles of local stories, social happenings, photos of the townspeople, and especially the art lodged firmly in her thoughts. This was what they were doing, what was important, what they looked like, what they were advertising to sell, what they banned. She was in their world as they saw it, not as the evangelical church saw it. She hadn't expected to be in their world like this. It seemed so personal, not like a history book. She felt as if she were invading their daily lives, spying on them, and beginning to judge them. The closer she got to the back gate, the more the issue was revived. The final resolution was no nearer. When the gate to the backyard closed behind her, the sound of the latch triggered a disruptive thought. She was in her family's world. It was their realm. I have to tell, when she stepped into the house, she imagined the confrontation. They would ask, why hadn't she told her parents right away? Why did she go back? Didn't she know it was wrong not to believe, to question the church? What exactly had she read? Did she believe it? Did she tell anyone? It might mean confession to Pastor Habsburg and in front of the church. It would mean rehabilitation camp. She had a reputation. She had been admired, praised, honored. She would now be a sinner, a betrayer. She could not endure that. She could not talk about any of it. Besides, it was a truth no one would believe. So what was the point? She needed to conjure up a reason for her silence. As she walked through the back door, she could hear pieces of disparate conversations floating through the house. She dashed upstairs, through her room, and into the bathroom. She showered and sat at her desk with volume, one of the struggle in front of her, and her notebook to the side. After reading the first paragraph, her mind went to the Last Judgment and the other art. She had never thought the human body could be presented so lovingly. The art was beautiful. The art was created with reverence to the human form, God's form. 3 crisp knocks meant Naomi was at the door. It's time for dinner. Teasing, she added, take off your filthy boots and come down. Before Bethany could answer, she heard Naomi's footsteps pattering down the stairs. On the way downstairs, Bethany imagined the question she would be asked about her hike, and she imagined the lie she would tell. Scene 5. Images on the ceiling. As the Colon family finished dinner, Bethany's mother commented, "You've been awfully quiet. You usually chatter even with some food in your mouth." The family laughed. Seeing the others laugh, Bethany faked a smile. Her mother continued, "What's on your mind? It must be really important to cause such silence." Naomi added, "She hasn't said more than a few words since she returned from her hike." I've just got stuff on my mind." "Like what?" her father asked. "Just school. Trying to remember all the historical events." Naomi countered, "Since when? Your mind is like a trap. You usually have no trouble." "Usually, but we've started a new book, so there's a lot more now. Every year, they add to it. I just need to sort it out. It'll be fine. Besides, you're the one with the great memory. You remember all those Bible passages." "I'm pretty good at that, aren't I? Anyway, if you need help, we can read to each other, and then we can quiz each other." "That's a great idea," their mother said. Bethany deflected attention away from her real quandary, the archives. "That would be great." "What's the new book?" her mother asked. "The Struggle." Naomi added, "It's really long. 3 volumes." "That's because it was a long struggle," their mother said. "I remember that book," their father said. "Really informative. Shows the courage that our founders showed over a long stretch of time. They stuck to their principles, and we should all be glad they did." Their mother added, "Impressive people. They fought hard, and we benefited. We became a righteous Christian nation. Righteous United Christian States of America. Their father corrected emphatically. Naomi enthusiastically agreed. That's right. Esther's husband's correction was just one of many chastisements she had endured. This one had been very mild. Still, she felt its cut. But, as necessitated by the Bible, she absorbed the feeling and fell silent. She would stay that way and putter around the house cleaning until the feeling left. The house was always very clean. Well, let's get started, Naomi said. This should be exciting. Inside, Bethany cringed. Outside, she smiled. Absolutely. Naomi and Bethany climbed the stairs. For the rest of the evening, Bethany and Naomi took turns reading and quizzing each other on what they had just read. When they started nodding off, Naomi went to her room, climbed into bed, and was asleep in minutes. Bethany was not asleep in minutes. She stared up at the ceiling, picking out the changing images created by the swirls of paint. As the image of a bear formed on the ceiling, Bethany stopped resisting the pictures from the art book. Then, one by one, the pictures from the religious art book supplanted the randomly placed imaginary figures. She couldn't wash away the Sistine Chapel's panels, displaying the naked beauty of the human body. They were not sinful. They were beautiful. She now saw that the people were just in their natural state, naked, no prurient thoughts, no titillation. She saw the pictures as celebrations of the human body, the body that the Bible said was made in God's image. Adam and Eve were naked until their fall from grace. Only then did their nakedness feel shameful. If humans hadn't fallen, would all people be naked? I couldn't do that. What would people think of me, she wondered. She paused. But no one would feel that way, and neither would I, because it would be normal and we would all live in the Garden of Eden. Never too cold nor too hot. No clothes necessary. No concept of clothes. They were childlike thoughts, fanciful imaginings. Then a silly thought entered her mind. Did God wear clothes? Why would he? She thought for a moment and whispered, the paintings are beautiful. They are us at our finest, at our purest. They are us without sin. Are our clothes intended to hide our sin, our impure desires? She had another realization. She could never talk about this. It was an idea that would be seen as dirty, smutty, sinful. She feared that's how she would be seen. The underground library had to remain a secret, and she needed to know the truth about her belief about the church. I can't stop. I have to know. She fell asleep, more determined than ever to know the truth or falsity of her life with the church. Scene 6. Habsburg Sermon. As the Colon family entered the church, Ethan and Esther were greeted with bless you handshakes by those he passed and nods by those at a distance. Esther received nods as she dutifully walked behind her husband. Naomi and Bethany staidly walked behind, as had always been required, though it took a few young years to learn. As the Colons moved to their front pew, bright morning light shining through the stained glass windows marked a sparkling colored path. Lifting her arm slightly, Bethany watched the colors march up her arm and ripple across her eyes. A bevy of beautiful flowers adorned the altar, a rich dark oak with simple carvings of angels on the face. High behind the pulpit, the subject of the sermon was displayed. Deuteronomy 21 verses 18 to 21 and Proverbs 23 verses 13 to 15. Like 70% of the people, Bethany could not recall the passage, even though she had read the entire Bible twice and studied it in school. The talk among the congregation was barely a murmur, except for the older children, who were chastised when they exceeded the volume limit. While most of the younger children had been escorted to Sunday school, there were always a few parents who brought their toddler children with them and demanded that they learn, with a slap on the hand, proper decorum at an early age. During quiet moments, the slaps could be heard. Rarely did they cry. At precisely 8:15 of the 8 o'clock service, Pastor Habsburg entered from a side door in the back and took his position at the pulpit. After the greeting and a prayer, a blessing and a solemn hymn, Habsburg began by reciting the Deuteronomy passage. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and, though they discipline him, will not listen to them, Then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Shortly after the sermon started, Bethany knew it had been recycled from 3 months prior. The sermon had always been a popular topic for parents, discipling children, though most disagreed with stoning to death. The age of the children didn't matter, according to the pastor. As Bethany listened, Habsburg drew parallels to the modern world. Basically, children, both boys and girls, were, by nature, sinners. Evil was lurking just below the surface and needed to be driven out. Children had to be shown the Lord's path to goodness and needed strict discipline. Habsburg then recited Proverbs 23 verses 13 to 15. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. Bethany kept waiting for Pastor Habsburg to decry the last part of the Deuteronomy passage. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. While he did not focus or expand on it, he let rest in the minds of the congregation as if to say, It's your choice. Unlike times before, this time, she was saddened and outraged. This sermon on discipline did not have the sympathy and compassion of the previous pastor, Pastor Donahue. Habsburgs contained a violence that Bethany abhorred. She found her hands shaking. She wanted to escape before he said another word. She scanned as much of the room as she could. There were a few expressions of dismay, but not many. She hoped that sitting behind her there were more. Naomi and her mother were grimacing. Her father had a placid expression. What he had heard registered no reaction. She expected her father to be appalled, or at least dismayed. She saw neither. Yes, her father was a tough, determined, insistent man, but she had never seen him behave violently. Now she wondered if he had just hidden it. It would have been easy. Her mother had always been the disciplinarian. Her father had worked a lot, coming home late, so he spent little time with his children. Essentially, the house operated without turmoil. This shined a different light on him. She would never view him the same again. He was a man to be feared. That meant she had to keep her objections to herself. Bethany swallowed her feelings and climbed within herself. On the ride home, her terse responses to her family did not go unnoticed. She countered inquiries with, I'm just not feeling well. It wasn't a lie. The thought and vision of the stoning had put a knot in her gut. It was happening more often. At home, she retreated to her bedroom, dropped herself on her bed, propped herself up with pillows, and agonized over the sermon. It wasn't that Habsburg sermon was a revelation, a new or novel idea. Friends had told her about the physical punishments they had received, and ones about which they had heard, some harsh. Bethany had refused to believe the accuracy of the stories. Her family was not like that, so the stories were exaggerated, likely grossly. She also knew people accepted physical punishment as a practical, effective, immediate response to misbehavior that was condoned by the Bible. Everyone had heard, spare the rod, spoil the child. It was more than a proverb, it was guidance. The reason for the mysterious bruises on students, both boys and girls, at school and church had now been solved. The winces when they sat or gently moved their arm or leg had a new meaning. It wasn't a fall, tripping down the stairs, running into a wall, hitting their head on the corner of the coffee table. The swollen I wasn't from walking into the side of the door, and it wasn't the catch-all reason, soccer. The hand-sized red mark on a boy's cheek wasn't caused by an errant ball. She now had to admit it was biblical parenting condoned by the church and practiced by the school. At boys' schools, swats had been given. The boys fell in line after one of them had the wood put to them. The girls were not hit. They were chastised savagely, made to feel small and sinful. The major brutality was carried out behind the walls of the home. She had assumed those methods in the Bible history had been abandoned or they were allegories. But it was clear too many parents took them literally. Today, this had come from the pulpit, and as such was God's command, or at least a recommendation, because Habsburg was speaking for God. However, to Bethany, it was a call to violence, an act that struck her to her core. It felt like vengeance within a family. It didn't feel as something Christ would condone. It felt like hate, and that always cut her deeply. Naomi knocked softly on Bethany's door. A weak yes came from Bethany. "Can I come in?" Bethany gave another weak response. "Yes. How are you feeling?" "Just a little sick to my stomach." "I'll be fine. Just need a little rest." "Do you want me to get you something for your stomach?" "Maybe some crackers would help." "How about some soup too?" "Like chicken noodle." "Maybe later. Just crackers for now." Naomi returned with the crackers, unsalted tops, one of Rita's minor health recommendations. It wasn't long before their conversation started that Naomi approached Habsburg's sermon. Pastor Habsburg's sermon was brutal. Not necessarily. I mean, I could see how some kids need strict discipline. We've never been even spanked. Yeah, but we're never bad, either. If kids wouldn't be bad, they wouldn't be spanked. Most of the ones who get hit are boys, and you know how they're always getting into trouble. Sometimes that's the only way they can be controlled. Maybe. I just don't like it. It's cruel and mean and hateful. Not always. It's like Pastor Habsburg said, it is done out of love so the child's soul can be saved. Bethany didn't answer. She had always assumed that Naomi harbored the same views as she did. Naomi now looked different. As Naomi defended the efficacy of physical punishment, Bethany saw vertical frown lines forming between eyes and a touch of hardness around her eyes, something she had never noticed before. How long had it been there? Bethany went silent. Naomi asked if she was okay. Bethany said, "I'm tired and want to go to sleep." The conversation ended with the girls sensing another small fracture in their long, solid friendship. Scene 7. Christ not your Savior. The next Sunday, as Pastor Habsburg rose up to the pulpit, Bethany was set to capture every word, phrase, sentence, and idea. She would not be surprised, as she was by the spare the rod spoil the child sermon. She would assemble his thoughts and search for any contradictions with truth, morality, and especially compassion. How close would this sermon be to the teachings of Christ? Would Habsburg speak in terms of Christ's love or fear of God's wrath? The sermon began with the love of Christ, supported by several biblical passages. Habsburg brought them alive with colorful stories. This was not the harsh sermon of spare the rod spoil the child sermon. As he wound through one story and then another, Bethany noticed a slight alteration in tone. The further he went, the more intense he became, and the closer to the edge she was pushed. Then he revealed his destination. With an intense scowl, he growled, "Christ cannot be seen as a savior from sin and God's wrath. We must talk about sin and God's judgment of all of us. We cannot be silent about our sins and others' sins. God sees our sins, and he does judge us. We are not to see Christ as the Savior who rescues us from facing our sins. He is not to be used to make us feel good, to make us feel that God will not judge us. We are to be judged. Christ is not here to prevent it. If we sin, we must feel God's wrath. Christ is not a buffer from God's wrath. Christ is not to save us from the sorrows of this world and God's punishment. We are to experience them and to experience God's wrath. We sin. We are punished. As evangelical Christians, we accept this. This is what makes evangelical Christians special, different, chosen by God. We are the rightful heirs to the Christian faith. We are divinely guided by the Lord's hand. We accept his wrath and punishment when we sin. We do not look to escape it. As such, we are the blessed ones. Thus, when we repent, he knows that we have paid the price for our sins. We have faced the wrath of God, and God honors that. Bethany now remembered she had already heard much the same thing from other pastors and her parents, but not so adamantly or angrily. But this was the first time she had heard it filtered through her truth, her humanity, her morality. It had been mere words before, words that were to be believed without thought and in agreement with doctrine. They were a community of words, commonly accepted beliefs that tied evangelical Christians together, but they were no longer so much her words, her beliefs. Bethany's impulse was to walk out of the church, but her religion and her parents' strictures fastened her to the hard, dark wood. For years, Bethany had been feeling her way through the darkness, thinking that the evangelical Christianity was the only world, the real world, the only world truly blessed by God. She was now wondering if she had, unknowingly, always lived in darkness. Would coming into the light be blinding? Would she still be wandering blind, but just in a different world? Pastor Habsburg's truth was not her truth. To her, his truth was distorted. To seek salvation through fear was simply succumbing to threat, redemption through force. She wasn't really being allowed to choose, to seek and believe her own truth, the real truth. Ultimately, she realized she was not meant to choose, just accept and follow. She felt she was being accorded no free will. And as long as threat was used as the lever for salvation, there really was no free will, and thus no salvation. Free will was essential. Threat and force were the destroyers of salvation. She did not admire her society. Could she have admired the other? Could she trust the Jenkins Corners archives? A vortex of questions was placed before her. How had the other world, the United States, transformed into this one, into Pastor Habsburg's world? What had happened? Had that society died from within through sin, immorality, greed, and inhumanity? Had the United Christian States of America risen from the ashes of evil or the extermination of a better, freer society? Had an external force been planned, which then fostered the demise of that society? If their society had been better, how had the United Christian States of America prevailed? Had they seen a weakness and exploited it, used it to create the failure? Had these ancient people feared it would fail, or took for granted it would never fail? Did they know how it would end? Did it matter? Had it ever mattered? Were they aware it was happening but failed to do enough to save it? Did enough people want to save it? Was their demise their own fault? Were they aware of what they had lost? When did they become aware? Still, she needed to know if there had been a better world, a better society, a more humane world, a world where there was real choice. She now wanted the founding history of the United Christian States of America. She had been taught to be a fabrication, a lie. If it wasn't Habsburg's professed God of love, would also be a God of wrathful judgment and inhumane punishment. All would be judged for their sins and experience God's revenge, violence, destruction, and inhumanity. Was this really God's nature, his truth? Was Habsburg's God the foundation for the evangelical Christian religion and their nation? How many lives did they have to destroy to get their United Christian States of America? How many people did they kill? How many are they willing to kill to protect it? This can't be what God wanted, she thought. Bethany felt a push on her shoulder. The sermon is over, Naomi said. I know, Bethany said with slight annoyance. Where were you? Just thinking about stuff. What stuff? Just the things he was talking about. Sin, God's wrath and judgment. It's kind of scary. Yeah, but it makes people be good. I guess so, Bethany said passively. Don't you think it does? There's still a lot of bad things happening. But think how much worse it would be. To ward off a confrontation, Bethany unenthusiastically agreed. Yeah, you're in another weird mood. Let's get to our group. They entered room 3 in the annex attached to the back of the church. A dozen other 8th graders marched into the room. Mrs. Lambert greeted them with God bless. For the next hour, Mrs. Lambert fielded a question about the sermon, adding a few views of her own, none of which opposed the point of the sermon. Bethany did not participate. Naomi did, and with looks and nudges, urged Bethany to participate. On their way to the car, Naomi's concern over Bethany's odd mood produced repeated queries, followed by Bethany's responses that nothing was wrong. She was just deep in thought. Naomi didn't get a satisfactory answer, but Bethany did brighten Naomi's mood when she changed the topic to boys, 8th grade girls' favorite subject. Bethany knew Naomi would take control and chatter ceaselessly. Bethany would engage only seldom with forced enthusiasm. Scene 8. Presentations. Monday was the first day of students giving classroom presentations, and Bethany was fighting against the distraction of the underground archives history. Mrs. Sanderson had assigned each student a topic to present from a chapter of their history book, The Struggle. Mrs. Sanderson expected the presentation to be the typical 8th grade presentation, choppy and meandering. She would repair it in post-production. Cynthia, a reticent speaker, had been assigned the first presentation, essentially a section of the first chapter of The Struggle. She arrived to class early and squirmed in her seat, waiting for what felt to her like an execution in front of firing squad. With an anxious expression, she watched her classmates enter. Some provided her a sympathetic expression. They felt her fear and knew it would eventually become theirs. Once all the students were seated and calm, the process began in just a few minutes. Mrs. Sanderson stepped to the front of the class, glared at Roberta, who fidgeted during the first 5 minutes of each class. When Roberta finally felt the glare, she put her hands on top of the desk, a requirement Mrs. Sanderson had made for the beginning of each class. Before we have Cynthia's presentation of our history text, The Struggle, I understand that there has been some confusion about the history of our town, Lord's Bounty. Some of you think that Lord's Bounty was built over the town of Jenkins Corners. That is inaccurate. Jenkins Corners is at a different location, somewhere deep into Jenkins Woods. No one seems to know where anymore. Nature has probably taken the town back. Annie raised her hand. Yes, Annie. So, is that where Jenkins Woods got its name? That's exactly right. Mrs. Sanderson waved Cynthia forward. Cynthia, would you please come to the front of the room and present your report? Now, let's let Cynthia have our attention. Class, it would be a good idea to take notes. A hand rose. Elizabeth, do you have a question? Kind of. I don't exactly know what kind of means in this context, but go ahead. She's giving a report on a chapter we were supposed to have read, and we're taking notes. That's correct. But why do we? With an intense expression, Mrs. Sanderson curtly said, assume I have a reason, and just do it. Elizabeth sunk into her chair. As Cynthia gathered her notes, she quietly muttered, I wish she would call me Cindy. I told her I hate to be called Cynthia. Keeping her knees together ladle-like, Cynthia turned toward the aisle, stood, and with her head lowered and notes in her hand, she walked as calmly as she could and stood next to Mrs. Sanderson's desk. Mrs. Sanderson walked to the side of the room, where her presence was less likely to disturb Cynthia. Cynthia, lift up your head and begin. Shyly, Cindy raised her head, deadly fear showing in her eyes. She dropped her notes and leered at them momentarily, as if they had sabotaged her. As she squatted, she remembered to show proper decorum. She kept her legs together, picked them up, and stood. After a moment of gathering her composure, she started. My report covers the begin. Speak up, dear. What you have to say is very important, and you need to be proud of it. Yes, ma'am. My report covers the very early beginnings of the movement to create a Christian nation, which would later transform into our United Christian States of America. The editor of The Struggle, Anton Haig, says that while the desire for a Christian nation had been around for a long time, it took an act of violence to activate Christians to believe it was possible. It began when a candidate who supported a Christian nation was cheated out of his victory in 2020. The vast majority of people, 60 to 70% of the people, were denied the Christian leader that had won. Demonstrations broke out across the country, but they were savagely put down, costing thousands of Christian lives. As her nervousness grew, Cindy hesitated more. The largest demonstration was in a place that was called Washington, in the District of Columbia. They called it the capital of the country. It was where the government at that time operated. The demonstration was peaceful until agent provocateurs planted by the falsely elected people who use violence to foment a riot. That riot was wrongly blamed on the demonstrators who were just expressing their rights. Cindy paused, looked at her notes, and looked at Mrs. Sanderson. Mrs. Sanderson nodded and mouthed go on. Many of the demonstrators were wrongly arrested, indicted, and convicted in courts run by the group who had illegally taken power. Almost everyone was outraged over the use of the justice system to deny people their rights and their liberty. When the people were in jail, they were abused viciously. The anger grew quickly. Cindy looked at her notes again. She scanned the pages as if she had forgotten something or lost her place. In a panic, she stopped and looked at Mrs. Sanderson. Mrs. Sanderson saw the tears grow in the corners of Cindy's eyes. "That's fine, Cynthia. I'll take it from here. For being the first one to give a presentation, you did a fine job. Have you ever spoken in front of class before?" "No, ma'am." "Then you did very well. Leave your notes on my desk and have a seat, dear." Cindy put her notes next to the struggle history book. Mrs. Sanderson centered herself in front of her desk and waited for the class to settle. "Girls, the event doesn't stop there. The people were demonstrating against an illegitimate election. Rob Bridgman, a man sent by God, had won the election but had been denied his victory, our victory. He was the only candidate who stood up for us, who fought for us, who understood our plight. The country was outraged. That's why they demonstrated. If more people in the government had the courage to do what was right, it might have corrected the injustice, but that didn't happen. However, it showed what might be possible. Huge swaths of people from everywhere were willing to come together to oppose the corruption. Many people in the government knew that Rob Bridgman had been denied, but too many did not have the courage to stand up. If there was enough strength and determination among the demonstrators for that demonstration, it would be possible to do it again, with much more success. Many people thought the demonstrators could have taken over if they were to resort to violence, but they did not. Still, many were wrongly accused of sedition and imprisoned. Regardless, it showed that if Christians wished, the next time they could be successful. Elizabeth's hand shot straight up, yet again. "Elizabeth, you have a question?" "Not exactly a question, just a verification of whether I'm kind of understanding it." "Okay, go ahead. So, did this demonstration lead to others? And did those lead to the wars we learned about?" "Not wars, Elizabeth. Christian revolutions for our God-given rights to worship as we wanted and needed to honor our Lord." "Yes, ma'am. That's what I meant." "Yes, the demonstration led to others, but the revolutions did not come for quite a while. After the first demonstration, there was turmoil for several years as the people felt more and more disenfranchised, like their rights didn't matter, like their religious convictions didn't matter. No one was representing their wishes and needs while other people's needs and desires were being tended to. Christians felt like strangers in their own country, even though the country had been founded by Christians. Even the governing body was almost entirely Christian. However, at the beginning, only a few spoke up to defend our rights, but when they saw the will of the people being displayed across the country, they began to speak out and support us. They saw the need to save the country from evil influences. 4 years later, in 2024, the people's choice was illegitimately denied again. There were demonstrations again, but they were larger and more widespread. Again, people were wrongly imprisoned and badly mistreated. The girls' eyes were wide with anger and fixed on Mrs. Sanderson. Christians were even more enraged. They had been cheated twice. The demonstrations were enormous. When the demonstrators refused to leave, the authorities resorted to violence, killing hundreds of peaceful demonstrators. After that, armed military patrolled the streets and arrested anyone who resisted them. The class muttered protests. A few disapproved louder. They knew that they could not succeed through force. Each conflict meant more dead Christians and more leaders imprisoned. But they found a way. She walked behind her desk, faced the class, and said, "That'll be all for now. We'll pick up here tomorrow." While the girls groused, Elizabeth's hand went up. Impatiently, Mrs. Sanderson acknowledged her. "Elizabeth, please tell us what they did." "Tomorrow. Please," Darlene pleaded. Soon the room was filled with pleas. "I'm sorry. You'll have to wait. It will be good for you. Many of you need to learn patience." Mrs. Sanderson walked to the right side of the room, where 7 sheets of paper were taped to the wall. "I have divided your class into 7 groups, with 5 people in each group. There are 7 sheets of paper. Your name is on one of them. Find it. That is your group. No, you may not switch groups. If there are people in the group you don't like, guess what? Learn to get along. Find a way to cooperate. You've probably noticed cloth sheets cover things on the counter at the back of the room. Under them, you will find supplies and tools. You're going to make a diorama of an important event that led to the founding of our United Christian States of America. There's a list of the 50 most important events under the cloth sheet. Pick one, come to my desk, and I will write the group's name next to the event. It is first come, first serve, so make your choice quickly and then discuss what you plan to do. This is not just an exercise in making a 3D model. A more important written research report and a presentation will accompany it. Okay, get to it. As the desks crashed into each other, Mrs. Sanderson's voice pitched higher and stronger. Girls, stop. Calm down, or I'll have you all sit down and have you go up one at a time. The scramble stopped. At the wall, there were sighs of disappointment and controlled squeals of delight. Bethany and Naomi checked the assignments. Bethany and Naomi started looking at the same list, moved to the next, and then the next. Bethany found her name. Naomi's was not on the list. 2 lists later, Naomi found her name. Their mood turned somber. Scene 9. Inspiration and doubt. While Bethany was inspired by Mrs. Sanderson's passion, a persistent, niggling doubt remained. If the struggle was an accurate account, and Mrs. Sanderson's rendition of the cause of the demonstration was, as she said, maybe the decades of revolutions and violence which had become common knowledge were justified. While Bethany wanted to believe Mrs. Sanderson's zeal meant the history was true, she needed to know if it was really the truth or the real truth was something else. Whatever it was, she was driven to know. As she left the classroom, she wondered, if the histories are different, how will I know which history is accurate or more accurate? Anxiously, Naomi said, Bethany, wait up. Scurrying to catch up, Naomi missed all but the words more accurate. More accurate? More accurate than what? Naomi asked. Bethany's head twitched toward Naomi. I'm sorry. What did you say? You said more accurate. And I was asking what was more accurate. Like, more accurate than what? Until she could fabricate an answer, Bethany provided a filler. Nothing. Nothing? You're doing it again. You're here, but you're not really here. I'm sorry. Well, Did you take good notes? That was what I wanted to find out. If your notes were more accurate than mine, I wanted to check them, see if I missed anything. With Bethany's eyes uncomfortably locked on Naomi, it was easy to read Naomi's suspicion. Really? I swear, I'm just a little scatterbrained today. Today? Try for the past weeks. Okay. I don't know what is wrong. I had just been feeling off. Naomi pulled Bethany around the corner, covered her mouth, and said, Maybe you're starting your period. Menstruation? Yes. I started last year. You didn't say anything. It's not something to brag about. It's not a reward. It doesn't lend itself to an enjoyable discussion. Bethany gave a little laugh. It was, however, the first time I beat you at anything, and just my luck, it had to be something unpleasant. They walked to the pickup point and arrived just as the car pulled up. Bethany's mind drifted again and continued as such at home. She had a dilemma. She would need to pay close attention to the struggle, the student presentations, and Mrs. Sanderson's zealous lectures. They would give her the United Christian States of America's version of history for comparison. As the family finished the dinner, Mrs. Colin looked quizzically at the girls. Did you two have an argument? No, they answered rapidly, one after the other. Then what are the dreary faces for? Nothing, Bethany said. Naomi glanced at Bethany. That's not true. The class has group projects to do, and we're in different groups. Ask Mrs. Sanderson to do a switch. Bethany responded. She said we can't change groups. That's why I didn't want to talk about it. It won't change anything. It would just upset us. Their father's advice. You'll just have to live with it. Adjust and move on. No sense complaining about things you can't change. It is what it is. His advice was unsurprising, a well-worn cliché, and it put a period on the issue. Dinner was concluded, and the girls climbed the stairs. As they studied, Naomi chattered and Bethany tried to keep up. However, Jenkins Woods kept infiltrating her thoughts. It was only Monday, and Saturday's pre-dawn visit to Jenkins Woods stood well into the distance, and she couldn't drag it closer. It frustrated her, but she resolved to be patient. It did only a little to alleviate her anxiousness. Naomi continued to be annoyed by Bethany's drift. Indignant at Bethany, Naomi went to bed. Bethany went to bed with an image of her wandering in and out of the trees and reaching down to open the hatch. Scene 10. Abortion lecture. Bethany thought about ignoring the requirement for patience and visiting the underground library after school. It was hard to resist the impulse. Each time Jenkins Woods entered her mind, the desire to be there pulled her away from the class's instructions, except during history. The Tuesday and Wednesday student presentations and Mrs. Sanderson's expanded lectures on the struggle were beginning to captivate Bethany. She took copious notes to compare them to whatever history she might find in the underground trove. Each day, as Bethany entered Mrs. Sanderson's class, her mind opened and focused more than it had been in any class on any topic. When the class resumed on Thursday, Mrs. Sanderson was standing in front of the display board at the front of the room. She had her back to the class. The students were immediately attracted to Mrs. Sanderson's odd behavior. They became silent as they made their way to their seats. Then, as they settled in, whispering about her strange behavior began. Using the side of a piece of chalk, Mrs. Sanderson wrote, in 10-inch high red capital letters, 4 words, "Abortion is a sin." She turned to the class. In unison, the class gasped. It was a topic that had never been discussed with them because it didn't need to be. It was a core belief. There were no differing views of its morality. Everyone in the community had been in agreement for 200 years. It was a belief all girls had been taught hundreds of years ago, and it had long been accepted. It had been ingrained by the school, the church, and parents. There was no need to discuss the obvious. That is until girls entered the 8th grade. Then womanhood made it necessary. Mrs. Sanderson clasped her hands together, bowed her head, and remained silent. The class followed suit. 2 minutes later, she raised her head. In the evangelical Christian religion, the sanctity of life is paramount. It is God's gift to us, and everyone must protect it, especially the unborn. But more than 200 years ago, life wasn't. The unborn were allowed to be killed. The class startled. The students had never wondered about ending the life of the unborn any more than they would have wondered if the sun would rise. The belief was unquestioned. Before now, it was not a topic for young, impressionable minds. Those thoughts were never to enter the unduly young minds. But the girls were now at the age where womanhood was infiltrating and changing their bodies, and they needed to know the evil of the society evangelical Christian religion had fought against to gain its freedom. I want you to think about the cutest baby you've ever seen. Maybe it's a brother or sister or a cousin or related to a friend. The helpless infant might have a short, fuzzy tuft of hair sitting atop the head. His or her feet are kicking randomly. The arms are moving sporadically, the hands opening and closing, lips moving in and out as it gurgles and laughs. It's a beautiful sight, right? The girl's eyes lit as they smiled, nearly humming. Now, imagine that baby was never born. What if the mother had that beautiful miracle of God torn out of her womb 6 months before birth, for months, 2 months, or even just a week before the Lord's plan to have it come into the world? Can you see the lifeless, bloody baby laying on a cold metal tray, its legs and arms limp? Can you see it thrown into a furnace with the other trash after they had experimented on them and the usable parts had been removed? This is what abortion is. It is murder and mutilation, a violation of God's law. Expressions of distress, revulsion, and horror rushed over the faces of the girls. With her hand quickly covering her mouth, Megan stood and rushed to the bathroom. Mrs. Sanderson watched her dash out. See, awful, isn't it? It makes you sick to your stomach. It makes you want to howl in pain. If it doesn't, there is something wrong with you. She scanned the class. She had made her point. Her expression softened. Imagine if the mother gave birth. She and the baby would feel the joy of the Lord's blessings, the blessing of happiness. But abortion in the United States of America 200 years ago was legal. Murder and mutilation were legal because a sinful, immoral Supreme Court made it legal. Does anyone know what that ruling was called? No one's hand rose. I don't expect you to know that because we haven't gotten to that chapter of the struggle. It was called Roe versus Wade. In 1973, what the United States of America called the Supreme Court ruled that abortion was legal. In other words, the government sanctioned murder. It was legal, even if the person was in the mother's womb ready to be birthed. That ruling allows 90 million babies to be murdered and mutilated until 2022. A heavy gasp and groan rose. As with many of the girls, Naomi was fighting tears. Her chin quivered. Her emotions cratered. Bethany reached across the aisle and clasped Naomi's hand. Naomi squeezed hard. Bethany tightened her grip. The misery they shared was from the inhumanity of that old, sinful world. They were better than that. They knew it. They felt it. They had been taught that. It was a truth that refused denial. An inkling, merely a slight feeling, slipped into Naomi's mind. It was a vaporous sense that the day's topic was personal to her, somehow connected to her life. She searched for the cause of her discomfort, but could see nothing with which to link it. For Bethany, there was no personal link. Her life had been devoid of that trauma. Like the others, she was sickened by the depravity, but her revulsion did not bring with it an extreme, hostile condemnation. Still, it remained horribly wrong. Bethany thought, half a century of slaughter. No, her mind could not accept it. 90 million. If it were true, she should hate these people, but she could not bring herself to believe that anyone, even back in those dark days, could be that inhuman. There had to be a reason, some reason. They must have loved and despaired then, as people do now. There had to be good people then. They must have raised their children with love. Otherwise, if they were that evil, humanity would not have survived. People couldn't be like that. It was impossible. If an entire nation would do that, there was ultimately no help for humankind. The United States had allowed people to kill the innocent, unborn children. Any woman who didn't want her baby could demand that it be torn from her, even if it could live outside the womb. Their scientists felt free to use the fetus for experiments. Then a miracle began. Before God's chosen man, Robert Bridgman, was illegally denied his victory, God took the lives of sinful judges, and President Bridgman replaced them with God's chosen people. They saved the lives of hundreds of thousands and millions of children. They ended half a century of murdering babies that was sanctioned by the government of the United States. Did that make the United States of America evil, Satan's country? How could it be otherwise? Because Christians wanted to protect the unborn, we were persecuted and denied our right to a Christian nation, a nation that supported our beliefs, our freedom to worship as we pleased. To emphasize the false claim that the states were united, Mrs. Sanderson bookended the words United States with 2 fingers from each hand each time she said United States. She also added a smirk or a sneer each time. Tomorrow we will learn about the great demonstration, the day Christians in a small town stood up to the oppressive United States. What followed it, no one expected. A moan rippled across the room. You'll just have to wait. Now, get back to work on your projects.